So, what happens when a book that everyone, and I mean everyone, expects to be a monster hit, gets a really, really scathing early review? Well, that's what we're talking about today. We're diving into Aaron A. Craig's super hyped adult fantasy debut, A Land So Wide, and breaking down one of the first critical reviews that suggests this thing went off the rails.
I mean, listen to that opening line from the review. It just pulls you right in, doesn't it? It sets this incredibly dramatic and, yeah, pretty critical tone. You can immediately picture this amazing premise that, according to this critic, just completely unravels by the end.
Okay, so first things first. Why was everybody so excited about this book? Well, it really all comes down to the author. Aaron A. Craig is already a #1 New York Times bestseller in the young adult world, so her big jump into adult fantasy? Yeah, it had everyone's attention.
And the numbers here really do tell the story. A first print run of 100,000 copies? For a debut in a new genre, that is huge. And get this, over 500 requests for early copies on NetGalley. That's a ton of interest from reviewers and influencers. All the signs were pointing to an absolute blockbuster.
So, before we really get into the nitty-gritty of the critique, what is this book even about? Let's take a quick run-through of the story.
The story basically breaks down into 3 acts. It starts with our main character, Greer, stuck in this cursed town. When her fiancé disappears, she does the forbidden thing and runs after him into the spooky woods. And that's when things get complicated. We're talking betrayals, a very messy love triangle, and, oh yeah, she suddenly has magical powers. All of this barrels toward a finale that the reviewer called super rushed and just, unsatisfying.
Okay, so the premise sounds pretty solid, right? A cursed town, a rescue mission, pretty compelling stuff. So where exactly does it all fall apart? Well, this review points to 3 big specific problems. First up, the magic system, or the lack of one. Greer finds out she has this crazy powerful screaming ability, but instead of it being this cool, earned power-up, the criticism is that it basically just shows up out of nowhere. It feels less like magic and more like a cheap plot device to get out of trouble.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. There are no rules, no training, no hints that this is even possible. So when you get to the big climax, she just screams and wins instantly? According to the review, that lack of any real setup just completely kills all the tension the book had been building. It's a total letdown.
All right, flaw number 2 is the romance. The book was marketed as being profoundly romantic, but this review, it paints a totally different picture. It's described as underdeveloped, messy, and frankly, pretty uncomfortable.
And wow, this comparison to Twilight is just brutal, but it's also incredibly effective. The second you mention Jacob-Renesmee, everyone immediately knows what you mean. A relationship with a really weird, kind of creepy age gap dynamic. And that's a long, long way from the profound romance that was advertised.
And the third major problem here is the pacing. The reviewer says that after a really strong start, the story just hits a wall and slows to a crawl for a huge chunk of the middle. And then, it suddenly sprints to the finish line with this incredibly rushed ending, like the author just wanted to get it over with. So after all of that, what's the final verdict from this reviewer? Let's look at the rating and see how this book really stacks up against some of the other giants in the fantasy genre. The final rating? A solid, but not great, 3 out of 5 stars. The reviewer even says it's a promising start that ultimately crashes harder than a kangaroo on skates. So, not terrible, but a massive disappointment considering all that hype. And you can really see the issues when you put it next to other beloved books. The review points out that the pacing is weaker than Craig's own YA novel. It doesn't have the rich, authentic world-building of something like The Bear and the Nightingale, and its climax just doesn't hit as hard as the one in Naomi Novik's Uprooted. The comparisons really aren't flattering. So let's get down to the bottom line. After all this, should you actually read this book or should you give it a pass? Here's the final takeaway. So who might still like this? Well, if you are a die-hard, loyal fan of the author, you might still find something to love. Or maybe you're just looking for a really atmospheric, spooky wilderness story and you don't mind if the plot is a little messy. For those people, this could still be a fun read. But on the other hand, if you're someone who needs a satisfying romance, or a plot that makes sense, or a magic system with actual rules, yeah, you should probably skip this one. The review is pretty clear that for those readers, this book is just going to be frustrating. And that leaves us with this final question, which is something I think is really interesting to think about.
It gets right to the heart of our relationship with authors and the massive expectations we build up. When an author we absolutely love puts out something that just doesn't quite hit the mark, how do we feel about it? It's definitely some food for thought.